I think
hey, we're
live. We are live.
Hey, everybody. I see we're starting to get some people coming in. We're just going to hang out here for a couple minutes, waiting for more people to come. We'll probably start around 3:02. So if you want to just like shout out where you are and where you're coming in from, it'd be nice to know who's hanging out with us today.
That's good. Hi, Misty. So excited you're here today.
Yeah, it's good to see you.
Yeah, I know.
It'd be nice if we could do all this in person, but it is nice to be able to do it online and be able to reach more people.
Absolutely. There's definitely a lot more events that I've been able to be a part of than I would normally be able to be a part of.
I know, me too.
Hi,
look, there's someone from Florida.
Hey, Amaris.
And Philly. I'm just down from Philly. I'm in Virginia.
Hey, Mel from LA. From Houston, Misty. Hey. So we are so excited you're all here. We're excited to be here. It's a nice little distraction.
For all the chaos that's going on around us. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, hi, Anna.
Yeah. we're really excited to talk with you guys today. This is going to be real casual. We're just going to have a conversation with each other and a conversation with you guys. So we'll say this again later, but if you have any questions while we're talking, please put them in the chat. And we're just going to go, answer questions as they come up. And we kind of have a loose structure, but
operative word,
go wherever people.
But there's a couple of key things that we're going to talk about, covering from our inspiration all the way through our journeys, marketing, debuting in 2020, which is a challenge in and of itself. But ultimately, this is going to really be for you. So we want it to be useful for you. So as whatever questions you guys have, we are more than happy to answer them as we go through this session.
Yeah, and I think we're, it's 3:02. Some people are probably still arriving, but we're just going to start. We don't want to take too much of your time, so we're just going to keep going. But if anybody comes late, this is recording, and it is going to be posted online on Les Musas website in the webinar tab after this is over. So anyway, I just want to welcome you guys all to our webinar, Book Journeys, Our Path to Picture Books. It's hosted by Les Musas. Les Musas is a collective of Latinx authors and illustrators. And we just want to do a little shout out of Les Musas. So we just announced the 2021 Musas. And so we're really excited for that.
And I just sent a little, as we introduce some of these members, we're going to actually be sending out an offer. So it just basically gives you a link that you can follow and check out our 2021 Les Musas.
Yeah. And another cool thing that Les Musas just launched for 2021 is the Les Musas podcast. So that's really exciting. Some of the Musas have spearheaded that, and I think the first episode just launched recently. So I think Alexandra has a link to that as well, which hopefully you guys are seeing now. And then the last thing that we just wanted to shout out for Les Musas is the Latinx Book Fest, a Kidlit Book Fest.
Awesome.
That happened in December of 2020. We're in 2020. So just a little over a month ago, and it was the most amazing event. I think there were 40-ish panels with, I can't remember the exact number of speakers, authors, and illustrators that spoke, but it was a great event. It's all recorded. It's on the Latinx Book Fest, Kidlit Book Fest YouTube page, which I think is linked from Les Musas, but there should be a link that Alexandra just posted as well. And I highly encourage, if you're interested in writing and just amazing Latinx authors, I highly recommend checking it out. both Alexandra and I were lucky enough to be part of one of the picture book panels, picture books and all
with other fields.
Yeah, so that was really
and this was really and this webinar actually stemmed from the conversations that we started over there and that we had such a great time having, just because we start seeing a lot of similarities in our journeys, and even when our journeys aren't exactly the same, there's a lot of mysticism and a lot of silence and secrecy in this business, and writing can be a very solitary thing. So just even connecting with like-minded people who, you know, share some of the same struggles is just incredibly helpful.
Yes.
It definitely makes you feel less alone. So we're hoping that our talk today, our conversation, will do that for you all. So as I mentioned, we're going to be talking about our individual book journeys, from inspiration to publication and all the blood, sweat, and tears that it involved. Just kidding, no blood. Well, maybe. But no, seriously, we've loosely structured it, and I know we mentioned this, to include craft and business, but really ultimately this is for all of you. So we want this to be useful for you. There's going to be at the end a handout that has a list of resources, including our contact information, but really resources that involve craft, that involve anything related to craft, but also anything related to the business, as well as what to put on author websites, for both those who are pre-published and those who are already published or who are soon to be published. So hopefully it will be useful. Please do feel free to type any comments you have, any questions you have, and we will be monitoring the chat and kind of going in and out and reading and answering from them. And
we wanted to just throw out a couple polls at the beginning of our talk, just to get a general idea of kind of where you guys are in your journey, so that we can, you know, gear things towards the people that are here. And so you should be seeing a poll right now that asks, you know, whether you're an author, an illustrator, an author-illustrator. And we just kind of wanted to get an idea of who's here and who we would be speaking to. And it's looking like we have a mix, 50-50 of authors and author-illustrators. So that's great. Awesome. Welcome. We're excited to talk to you about both of those things, being author and illustrator.
Ah, so now we have one more for author. Two more for author.
All right. I'm in the minority here. Oh, wait, no, we're coming back.
So this is awesome. Good. We have an awesome mix here.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm actually going to end this poll, and I'm going to throw out another poll for you guys as soon as I can get back here. So we wanted to have an idea of where you are in the publishing journey. Anything from just starting out, looking for an agent, agented but not yet published, navigating debut year, and published. So this is, again, this kind of gives us an idea of where you are in the process, which will allow us to then tailor some of the conversations that we have, spending a little more time in one area and a little less time in another. But again, this is your webinar. This is our conversation. So anything that you want discussed, you can absolutely ask, and we'll touch on it.
Good.
We have a good mix too.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so luckily, you know, there's a lot of you that are just starting out, a lot of you that are looking for an agent, a couple of people that are published. We should have something for everybody. And like Alexandra said, if there is anything at all that you guys are interested in hearing about, talking about, just throw it in the chat. So we didn't really introduce ourselves, but I'm Zara González Hoang. I am the author and illustrator of A New Kind of Wild, which was my debut author-illustrator book that came out last year, almost a year ago, actually, now, April 2021. I'm also the illustrator of Thread of Love, which came out in 2018. And I have a book coming out that I illustrated called Mi Casa is My Home by Loren Sala, which will be out sometime later this year, fall 2021. So that's me. And we'll talk more about everything, but we just wanted to give like a quick little intro of some of the things that we've done.
I'm Alexandra Alessandri, and I am the author of FELIZ NEW YEAR, AVA GABRIELA, which was illustrated by Adi Rivera Sonda. It just came out October 1st of this past year. I'm also the author of the forthcoming Isabela and Her Colores Go to School, which I just discovered is already up on Goodreads and on Amazon for pre-order, which was awesome. So those are the two that I have, or one that I just published. The other one is forthcoming. And I have a bunch of other stuff on submission, but nothing else from me yet. So one of the things that Zara and I had talked about when we were coming together and trying to put this webinar together was the fact that a lot of our processes seemed very similar. A lot of the elements or some elements that we have in our stories were also very similar. There almost seemed to be almost like the search for home in our stories. Place is very, very important in both of the stories. In fact, setting is probably one of the big catalysts for the characters. In my story, FELIZ NEW YEAR, AVA GABRIELA, Ava is very shy, and she is traveling to Colombia. I'm Colombian American. And she's traveling to Colombia to celebrate New Year's with her family, but she's incredibly shy. And in her family, as is in my family, it's very, very large. There's a lot of tios, a lot of tias, a lot of cousins. And it's a struggle for her to find her voice in that setting. Little by little, through the interactions with her family, she does sort of start finding her voice in those in those moments. But one of the things that I realized, and actually it wasn't even as I was writing the story, it was actually after publication, as I started really kind of hammering through some of the answers to questions, and I knew where the story came from. I knew that I wanted to tap into my Colombia, the Colombia of my childhood that I remembered. I knew that I wanted to capture some of the beauty and magic that I loved so much as a kid growing up, getting this in this culture. But I didn't realize that in a way it was me trying to reclaim my home. It was me trying to reclaim Colombia for myself. I was born here. I was born in New York. I didn't speak English when I started school, but I was still born here. I grew up Colombian. My parents always telling me, you're Colombian. But it wasn't until after my dad died that I started really trying to find and learn more about this country that was mine, but it wasn't. So I think subconsciously when I was writing and when I set out to write the story of FELIZ NEW YEAR, AVA GABRIELA, and in all the other stories that I've since written that deal with Colombia, I was almost subconsciously trying to reclaim that and trying to capture a bit of Colombia that was not stereotypical, that wasn't the drug and guerrilla and car bombs of my childhood, the stories that I grew up hearing, but also just claiming kind of that beauty for myself.
Got it. I'm like shaking my head over here because we've talked a lot about our inspirations, and yet I didn't realize that it was after your dad died that you started thinking about these things, because my book, A New Kind of Wild, is inspired by my dad. And it wasn't until he passed away that I started searching for this thing that I felt that I lost, because my dad was Puerto Rican. It is Puerto Rican, I guess. I'm Puerto Rican, but I mixed. You know, my mom is white, my dad was Puerto Rican, and I grew up in the Midwest. I grew up in Minnesota. There weren't a lot of Puerto Ricans there. There weren't really, when I was really young, there weren't really a lot of Latinx people there at all. And so I missed out, and my family wasn't there. My Puerto Rican side of the family was not there. And so I missed out on a lot of that, the culture, a lot of that, that identity stuff. And it wasn't until after my dad passed away that I like really was like, I felt like I had lost something bigger. I mean, losing a parent is a huge thing, but I felt like I had lost something even bigger than that. And that was really what drove me to start writing again. And through my writing, when I first started writing this book, I didn't realize I was writing about my dad. It wasn't until later, as I started shaping the story and working with my editor, that I realized that the heart of this story was my dad's story. Because my dad, when he was a child, moved from Puerto Rico to New York. And this is a story that he told me over and over and over again, about how difficult it was to go from this place that was so magical that, you know, I had heard these just like beautiful stories about the magic and the wonder of this area in Puerto Rico where he lived, you know, to moving to New York, which was completely foreign, a completely different place. I mean, he lived in the mountains of Puerto Rico. He moved to the city. Like he grew up in Spanish Harlem. And so like, it wasn't until I really started digging into this story that I realized that the heart of it was that. And through writing it and through illustrating it, I really felt connected to my dad, and to Puerto Rico in a way that I had never felt like I could before. You know, like Alexandra is saying, you know, she was born here. I was born here. Like, I have these ties to Puerto Rico, but it didn't feel like it was mine in the way that, like, you know, maybe it would have if I had been born there or if I had grown up in New York surrounded by Puerto Ricans. I just, it was through writing the story and also through getting involved with Las Musas and other Latinx communities that I really felt like I found my reason for writing. And for me, my reason for writing is to write about my culture, to write about identity, to write about like what it is to grow up between cultures. And so I think like my point in all of this like ramble is that like we really need your stories. Yeah. You know, this I mean, we need fun stories and beautiful stories and silly stories, but we need them from everybody, right? You know, there's a lot of one type of story that's out there. And I think like what I've learned through this process is that in addition to it being extremely cathartic to write, it also like it's needed. I've had so many like fantastic interactions with kids and teachers, and even just like my own family after writing this book, just because I don't know, it gave something to them that wasn't there before. And it gave something to me that wasn't there before.
You know, it's funny you say your family's reaction, but I've gotten a lot of comments from my cousins. And so like one of the difference, like both my mom and my dad are from Colombia. My dad they're different regions. And most of the big celebrations were with my mom's side of the family, but all my dad's side of the family is in Colombia, and they're still in Colombia. But since writing this book, all my cousins that have read it have said how much this book just transported them to their childhood. It was like this like wealth of nostalgia, almost like, oh, for the good old days, back to the way we were when we were little. You know, a lot has changed since then. You know, our grandparents have passed. We don't have that. Everything's just been very almost like fractured, and there is that sense of loss. And so, yeah. I'm just going to also echo that, and we do need all the stories. And I think that in writing our stories, I think there was a sense of giving ourselves permission that it's okay to write our stories. I know when I started out, and I don't know if the same as you, Zara, but when I started writing, I wasn't writing myself. In my poetry, I was. When I was writing poetry, my dad and I had a complicated relationship, and there was a lot that I missed, and there was a lot of guilt when he passed that I channeled into poetry. And so my poetry, was okay. I was in there, but in the stories, there's almost this sense of giving myself permission to put myself, characters like my family, all its variations. And I think there's a sense of trying to get through that sense of permission that we are allowed, because it's still part of our story.
Absolutely. I mean, I was really worried when A New Kind of Wild came out that that people would read it, or like my Puerto Rican friends would read it or something and call me out as a fraud. And, you know, it really took a lot for me to understand that, like, I mean, this is my story. This is part of my life. I can write about this. I can write about this experience. This is my experience to write about. I grew up hearing these stories, and I think it's really important to be able to write to your truth, you know, to your truth. And I think it really, you know, I love your book, and like, I think you can feel that truth in it. You can feel that it is a real thing, that, you know, that it just feels real in a way that, that some books don't feel. And I
thank you.
I don't know. I feel like we keep harping on this, but I think that, like, we just all need to feel comfortable enough to write our truths and write the story that's really speaking to us. Even if we think that, you know, maybe it's not needed, or nobody else would care, there's always going to be somebody out there that is going to want to hear what your truth is, I think.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And also on the flip side, just, and I know we tend to talk a lot about, you know, writing ourselves in the stories. And we absolutely should, but then, you know, I'm also thinking now as we're talking about this, that, we also tend to be pigeonholed into only writing about that. And I think we have to give ourselves permission that, yes, we want to write our truth. We can write our truths, but we don't always have to. We can absolutely explore and write more than just.
I completely agree. I mean, I think too, like, one of the things that so yes, I want to write my truth, but that can be in different ways. So like, I want to write a completely frivolous story. You know, I have some, you know, story sparks that are like, whatever, but even writing something that is normal, like or not normal, I don't know what the word.
I know what you mean.
I'm still gonna, it's still gonna have parts of me in it, you know, because like the way that I depict a family, you know, well, granted, I'm an illustrator too, so I get to draw off that. But the way that I depict a family, no matter whose book I'm illustrating, is always going to be a little bit different, because I don't think that we can take ourselves out of the things that we write, even if it is completely frivolous, even if I'm writing about bears, you know, like, I think that, I think that's the beauty of writing, right?
100%. Yes. Yes.
And the nice thing is that we don't have to try and be anyone else now. You know, there is a hunger for stories that, you know, that are not just what has typically been the mainstream type of story. There is a hunger for these different types of stories, or even the same type of story, but told from a different perspective. And so I think that's really exciting.
Yes.
I feel like we could talk about this part of writing for a really long time, but I want to get more into like some of the process things, like how we come up with ideas, like the types of things that we do to like help us write our stories. I don't know. What do you think? You ready to?
Yeah, no. And I just want to mention, because Stephanie, I see your question. How do you look for an agent if you are new? And we're going to actually talk about that. If you don't mind holding on for just a little bit, we'll definitely talk about finding an agent. And it's funny because I was having this conversation, and it can be so overwhelming. And I would probably say that that's true for a good portion of this business and of the writing journey. But we're going to share our different experiences, but at the same time, kind of share some resources of where to look when we're looking for a new agent. So when we get to that part, if we don't say it, please remind us. Please ask the question again.
Yeah. So I don't know. Do you want to start, Alexandra? Like, how do you like come up with things? Like,
sure. So there's obviously the observing and looking around, and I'm constantly eavesdropping. I'm super chismosa in my son's life. My son is 13, and all his, as he's been growing up, I do just a lot of listening. When I would go pick him up, I would, just eavesdrop what kids are saying.
As you do.
as we now, it serves more than just, making sure things are okay, but it also is a great source of information. But I am really big on personal writing. When my dad passed, I dove into poetry and memoir, and actually, I initially thought I was going to write a memoir. But that got derailed in a wonderful way, and that's not what I ended up writing. But a lot of the ways that I brainstorm or they try to come up with ideas actually involves memories and recollections and really diving into a lot of my personal just experiences, because I think and what I've discovered through my journey is that at the heart of a story that will resonate not just with people who are like you, but people who are different, what becomes universal is the emotion, right? And I think in getting to that emotion, it ends up serving as a way, or in tapping into those memories, I tap into those emotions that end up kind of moving or transforming. But I love prompts. Storystorm is huge. FELIZ NEW YEAR, AVA GABRIELA got its initial start through Storystorm 2 years in a row. 2018, I knew I did. One of the days was about kind of mining your childhood and looking at elements from your childhood, cultural celebrations, etc., that you really loved as a kid. And that was the start, almost like that little seedling of, I want to write something that deals with these New Year celebrations. But then we had our own New Year's celebration, and our friend's daughter was really shy, and she was constantly hiding behind mom, wouldn't come out. And when the fireworks came out, she just squealed and started giggling and laughing and everything. And I was like, Ava, you found your voice. And that was kind of the first line, and that became the initial title or the tentative title for the book. And this was my first book that I sold, the first book that came out. Actually, it's not the first book. Sorry, I lie. It's not the first book. It's the second book that I sold, but it was the first book that came out. It was by no means the first book that I wrote. In fact, I got my agent in 2013, and and I sold the manuscript in 2019. So it was a long stretch, very agonizing at times. But anyways, I digress. That's for the next part of the section.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm similar in that, like, I think that memories and childhood are just such fertile ground for finding stories. I think about some of the things that I would have liked to have seen when I was a kid, books that I would have liked to read or have read to me. And I think those can be jumping off points for things. Like you, I also watch my kids. I have so many, like, just things written down, like from when my older son was younger, of stories that I mean to write and haven't gotten to yet. I also, like, am a huge proponent of keeping a writer's notebook. I have many notebooks because I'm also an illustrator, but, like, this one is all writing, right? This one is just writing. But I don't have my normal sketchbook with me, but I have another one that's, like, for story ideas. And then also, like, for me, like, once I have an idea, especially an idea that I can, like, I know there's a story there. Once I start working on a book, I also start a story sketchbook. This was my first one, and I was very ambitious and thought I would use all of these pages. I did not. Let's see if I think I have one. Now I use these for my my story sketchbooks, but I mean, they're full of, like, doodles and writing and whatever. Like, for A New Kind of Wild, I had all these, like, trying to figure things out. I also like to have conversations with myself. So, like, my story notebooks are like, it's writing and art and just trying to get my characters to speak to me. I know that's such like a weird thing. Like a lot of writers are like, oh, my characters just decided to do this. And you're like, that doesn't happen. But really, like, you're trying to get into your characters' heads. And when I was editing A New Kind of Wild with my editor at Dial, she kept asking me, like, why? Like, what was the reason that this character was doing this thing? And I had no clue. So I went into my writer's notebook and I just like wrote, and I asked them questions. You know, I like had a conversation with them in my notebook, and it sounds silly, but it totally worked. I was able to find like the answer to my questions. So like for me, like having a notebook to write and sketch and just like dream, and like that is like really a huge part of my process. Like I write on the computer once I have an idea of what I'm doing. But for me, like having a pen in my hand, like really helps. The other thing I like to do is, I think I told you this, Alexandra, I have typewriters, and I love to write on my typewriters too, because for me, I overthink everything. And in order for me to like truly write, I need to get out of my own head. I need to stop the doubting and I just need to get into a completely different headspace. And because I do so much on the computer, not using the computer gets me into a different place. So like sometimes that's writing with a pen and pencil or a pen and paper. Sometimes that's typing on a typewriter, anything to just like kick me out of my normal everyday state of being. It's kind of like trying to trick yourself into, I like to think of it as like I'm floating above the story and I'm just like trying to capture it as it goes by. And like, I know that sounds very like mystical and weird, but like, that's how it feels to me.
Yeah, no. And it's also kind of like, so one of probably our biggest villains in the creative phase is the imposter syndrome, and is the editor in us trying to nag at us because it's not perfect, because it's terrible. And so I'm the same way. And I think it is very important to have those conversations. I do a lot of why, so what, why. I already said why. What if? I also.
So what is good. I love so what as a question. Like you're writing something and you're like, so what? And it just helps.
I use it with my students as well when we're writing composition, like any kind of writing. So what is a great, but I'm the same way. I have my writers, I have different writers' journals. I have to brainstorm by hand. I have to revise on printed paper. So very similar. I guess very similar in that part of the process. The computer sometimes works. And also I think we get hung up a lot on what the right way to write is. And there's so many different ways to write that ultimately I think we should be using what works for us. So that's whether that changes between projects, whether that changes between genres, whether that changes, it is very important to have a place to write the ideas down, to brainstorm, but also it's like it's okay if you have a different process as long as it works.
I think like I've gone to a lot of like webinars or like writing talks or whatever, and you're always looking for that like silver bullet, right? The thing that's going to be like make you an amazing writer, the thing that's going to completely change your process. And the reality is there is none. It's different for everybody. Like you have to find the process that works for you. And, for me, it's a notebook where I can write really bad things and nobody's ever going to see it. And just like knowing that it is for me and me alone, like gives me freedom, gives me the ability to, not doubt myself for a little while. Because in this space, it's just for me. Like if it's crap and like nobody ever has to see it. And that works for me. But for somebody else, it might be completely different. And
even between projects.
Right.
So there's some projects that are quick that just kind of just pour out of you, and others that you're literally like tugging, trying to get every single word out and every idea. And it doesn't mean that one is better than the other. It's just, it's having a whole different process to be able to get there, and that's okay.
And I think the other key, because this is where I consider myself an illustrator who writes, not a writer who draws. Because for me, well, one, I've been drawing, well, yeah, I mean, I've been drawing so much longer than I've been writing. And I just feel a comfort with drawing that I don't feel with writing. You know, maybe someday I will get there. But I have to sometimes trick myself into writing because it's just so uncomfortable for me sometimes. Like, I have all these ideas and but it's hard. And I think this is, I think, something that's key for all of you, like, after you sell your first, and I don't know if this is the same with you, Alexandra, but like, before I sold A New Kind of Wild, I wrote so many stories. Yeah. I wrote so many stories because I didn't know any better. I didn't know any better. I thought they were all amazing. I didn't know much about plot. I didn't know much about, like, you know, that first pet books are like really hard to sell. You know, I didn't know anything about the industry. I just wrote. I wrote these stories because I had ideas and I wrote them, and I wrote so many of them. And that's great. I wish I could still do that. But then I published something, and publishing it and going through the editorial process, which was both amazing and also like so excruciating, it made it harder for me to write. Because now all of a sudden I was like, oh, okay, this story that I once thought was amazing. I look back at my first drafts of A New Kind of Wild was like crap. It was horrible. Like, I think about like having shown that to my agent, and I don't understand what she saw in it, right? Because I look back at it with all the knowledge that I have now.
But we're also our most critical person, though.
Well, that too, yeah. But I think, like, if we can leave anything with you, it's just write, and write with a beginner's mind, right? You know, yeah. in the, like, in Zen teachings and stuff like that, there's this whole idea of the beginner's mind, and like the more you know, the harder it is to do anything, and it's totally true. So I'm constantly trying to find that person that I was before I knew anything about publishing, that just wrote because they had stories inside of them and they didn't care whether they were good or bad. And I'm constantly trying to get back to that.
It's so crazy you said that, because it's so true. And I went through a period that I was like, I think my writing is broken, because I just can't. I keep freezing. I can't keep writing. And I did have to get out of my own way to be able to kind of.
And sometimes you just have to take a break.
Yeah, that's true. That is absolutely true.
But you just need to come back to it. I'm only now coming back to things, I feel like. I mean, granted, we're in the middle of a pandemic. Mm-hmm. I was very burnt out after my book came out. I had a baby. I had pandemic, like, whatever. I'm only now able to, like, start to find my process and the space for writing again. And I've been trying very, very hard to be nice to myself, to be okay with that, to understand that just because I'm not necessarily writing right this second doesn't mean that I'm never going to write again. Doesn't mean that the stories that I have inside me have gone away. It just means that right now in this season, it's too much, you know? And if I can find the time and the energy to write here and there, that's enough for me. So I think we also need to be kind to ourselves when we're writing.
That is very important. That's actually really, really important, because it's very dangerous to work ourselves to death. We need that space. We're human. We react to what's going on around us. We're not machines. And so it is very important for us to be healthy and recognize those boundaries. But it's hard, because we're told you have to keep, you know, producing. But there's sometimes that you can't.
Yeah.
You know, what matters,
and especially like if you're, you know, if you haven't been published, if you're trying to find an agent, if you're, you know, you put, or at least I did put too. All this pressure on myself, like that I had to meet all these goals. I had to do all these things. And yes, you know, you are the only one that's going to push you, especially before you have an agent, before you have other people advocating for you. But you also need to remember that, like, there's a time for everything, and sometimes that time isn't now. It's like the whole idea of seasons. I like to think of it that way. You know, especially, you know, like when you have little kids or something like that, you're like, okay, this is just a season. It's going to pass. All of this chaos is going to go away in theory. You know, and you just have to get through like a bad season to get to a better season, and get through winter to get to spring, whatever. That's super cliche, but I like to think of it that way. And that's okay. And it has to be okay, because if you're a writer, and all of you that are here are writers, whether you're published or not,
right,
we write, right? We write or we draw, or we do both. And that's just what we do. And even if we stop for a little while, it doesn't make us less of a writer or less of an illustrator. It just means that we have needed to take a break for our sanity or for whatever. We needed to refill our well, so to speak, right? You know, sometimes you're just so, you know, everything else is just sapping up all your energy. You need to go like consume things for a while, you know, whether that is just mindless entertainment or like taking walks outside or whatever. It's really important to take care of yourself in that way.
I'm going to add one more line on that one before we move on. But this is also true when you are, like you were saying, if you're a parent, when you're juggling a lot of responsibilities, if you work full time and are trying to build a writing career, and you're a parent, and you have all these other responsibilities, you know, the idea of you write every day, you have to write every day is not always, or if you have a chronic illness, I have a chronic illness, I can't, there's times I can't do what I used to do before. And we do have to be kinder to ourselves. We can't write if we're not kind to ourselves, and we're not conditioning ourselves and showing us that love. We won't be here to write.
Yeah. And I think you touched, just real briefly, you touched on my favorite myth to like bust, and that is that you have to write every day. I do think that we should all be creative every day in some way, shape, or form, because the thing about writing or illustrating or anything is the more you do it, the more like ideas you have, the more like creativity you have running through you. So I think that we all need to be creative every day, but sometimes being creative every day is just daydreaming, taking a walk without listening to anything, cooking. Like, it doesn't necessarily have to be writing or drawing. Sometimes that can be too much. And I think it's okay to give yourself a break and be like, okay, have I done something creative today? Yes. Even if it's not writing or drawing, that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
That's okay.
It's a way of refilling the well.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So do you want to talk about our agents? And yeah. And I'll talk about portfolios too as well.
Right. Awesome. So the next part of the section that we were envisioning here was the whole submission part. You know, what do you do when you have this manuscript? You run it through critique partners. I don't think we mentioned critique partners in the last one, but they're also very, very important in terms of growing as writers. But you have this manuscript, it's ready to be shared with potential agents. And it is a nerve-wracking, it's maddening at times. There's a kind of like a joke that publishing is slow until it is fast. Everything takes its time, and then it's like, no, we need it yesterday. So I'm just going to kind of go back to Stephanie's question with how do you find an agent? And again, remember, you guys can share, ask questions, and we'll touch on them. But how do you find an agent when you're just starting out? And there's some great websites out there. I think when I used Query Tracker way back when, like as I mentioned earlier, I got my agent back in 2013, and it wasn't the first manuscript. I didn't even sign with her for a picture book. It was for a young adult novel. But SCBWI and the conferences and Query Tracker were two big tools that I used when I was starting out. My first conference for SCBWI was 2012. I went with a half-done YA paranormal romance because that's what I was writing back then, with no Latinx characters. And it was a wonderful experience. I learned a lot. And then I kept learning and I kept learning. I finished that novel. I entered Pitch Wars with another novel. Pitch Wars was another great resource that I had at that time to try to find agents. And then I went to the conference, our local conference in January, and I met my agent, and I signed with her shortly thereafter. That's not usually the norm. That's not something that happens very, very often. And it was wonderful when I was writing this high, and then it took 7 years, 8 years for the book to come out. 7 years. I can't do math today. But Query Tracker was also another. Query Tracker was also another tool that I used that I would research. Google. I Googled all the agents and I made a list. I love lists. I brainstorm in lists, and I also, when I'm trying to map things out in terms of, or when I try to plan things out for, in this case, for searching for an agent, I used an Excel spreadsheet. I did a list, what the agents wanted, who were their clients, what, pros and cons, what type of agent they were, editorial versus not. And then I don't,
if anybody doesn't know what editorial agent versus not editorial agent is, because I also, when I was looking, because I consider myself an illustrator first and a writer second, I also was looking for editorially minded agents. Basically what that means is that your agent will work with you on a story before it goes out on submission, rather than, some agents, they just want to take the story fully baked and then they'll take whatever you send and send it off on submissions. I wanted, and it sounds like you wanted as well, somebody who was willing to work back and forth with us.
Yes, definitely. So just keeping track of all that and trying to identify what you're hoping for in an agent is very important when you're starting to look for an agent. Reading interviews. So as you start, going on social media and looking at authors that you look up to, authors who have stories that kind of fit in that same tone or feel that of your story. Do some research. Who's their agent? Who's their editor? Then look up that agent. What are some interviews that are out there with that agent? And trust your gut. I think that's very important too. We tend to fall into I want an agent because I want to get my work out there, but having a good agent is so much more than having just an agent. So
I think that is so, just needs to be highlighted. I think for some people, because publishing is so hard and because there are so many gatekeepers, the idea of getting an agent is like the golden ticket, right? You get an agent and then you're going to have a book published. But that's not always the case. I mean, sometimes it takes a long time. Like Alexandra was saying, 7 years. It took her from the time she got her agent to the time she published her first book. And so you really need to be, I think, choosy about the agents that you're looking at, about doing your research. I also did all of the same things that Alexandra did, or Alexandra. I always want to say your last name. Alexandra did.
I like alliteration. I should just post, mine.
It just sounds so nice together too. Anyway, I did all of the same things. I didn't use Query Tracker as much, but I did pop in there here and now and again. But I used Publisher's Marketplace, which is a subscription thing. But it's I think $25 a month. So I just did it for a month, and I was able to look up all of the agents that I was interested in, look up what deals they had. I could see who were the top agents. For, a year overall, who were the top agencies. I could see whether an agent was legitimate or whether they were just what they call a smagent, which is essentially not a good agent. A lot of those agents will charge for representation and stuff like that. That is not at all something that you should ever have an agent do. No agents charge. They make money when you make money. So when you sell something, they get a percentage, and that is how they get paid. If anybody's asking for other money up front, then that is probably not a good agent. But I did the same things. I did a lot of research. I met my agent at a SCBWI conference as well. I went to my first SCBWI conference, the New York conference, and I just soaked it all up. If you can afford it, and especially right now, because they're all virtual and they're actually much less expensive, the SCBWI conferences are really, really great. They have some amazing speakers, and they usually have agents and editors, so you can kind of get a feel for what different agents are looking for and stuff like that. But like I said, I met my agent at actually my local SCBWI conference, and I highly recommend going to your local SCBWI conference if you have one, and they are in most places. My agent was speaking. I went to her panel. I really liked what she was saying. I managed to talk to her afterwards. I am kind of shy and didn't actually like talk to her about anything about me or anything like that. I just was talking to her and just kind of seeing how she was, what, you know, like whether she seemed like somebody that I could work with. I did note that she had my postcard on top of her stack of little things. So I was like, oh, she likes my work. So that's great. But I didn't actually say anything to her about the fact that I was looking for an agent, or even that that was my postcard, until after after everything had passed and I was ready to go out and try and find an agent. To go out and query agents. I mentioned that in my query letter because that was a connection that we had, and that's something that's important in query letters, is to try and find some sort of connection to the agent that you are querying. And even if it's just like I did some research and saw that you're a very editorially minded agent, that's something that I'm really interested in because I feel like what I said was that I feel like I'm very comfortable with my drawing abilities, but I really want to write, but I would love to have some help to just like make sure that my stories are in a good place before we go out on submission or something like that. And I think, so any tie that you can, any kind of like connection that you can bring to your letters, to your query letters, your emails to agents, I think are important. I also just want to touch briefly on, the portfolio question. So Anna had asked, let me find that again. So you see a lot of suggestions for building a portfolio as an illustrator, but not necessarily for building a portfolio as an author illustrator. What is the difference? And I think there is no difference, really. The answer is that for an author illustrator, you want to have the same things in your portfolio as just an illustrator, in the sense that you want to make sure that you have character designs, showing characters multiple times with different emotions in different settings, so that art directors and editors can see that you have the ability to create continuity in a character. You can carry a character and make it look the same across, multiple pages or multiple scenes. The other thing is, full scenes, things with backgrounds. A lot of people are really great at characters. I love drawing characters. I struggle more with backgrounds. So it's something that I spend a lot of time working on, just trying to improve like how I create backgrounds, how I bring some of that magic that you get in a character into the backgrounds. And I will say that one of the ways that I do that is putting some of myself into the backgrounds and into the scenes. And that's another way, just like writing, that you can just bring realness and like personality to your illustrations, is by inserting some of real life into the backgrounds of your characters. The other thing is, in a typical illustrated or illustration portfolio, you might have, pattern design and, not logo design, but like, different editorial illustration or stuff like that. And that's all fine. You can put that stuff in your portfolio if you're trying to be a picture book illustrator. But really what editors and art directors are looking for is characters, scenes, and narrative art. So you want to show that you can tell a story over a series of pages. So one way to do that is to take some of your stories that you're writing and illustrate multiple scenes within them, and then put those, 3 scenes or whatever from your story into your portfolio. Now, the nice thing about doing that is if you have these like multiple images that look like they are a story, then if an agent or an art director comes across your portfolio, they might be like, you know, I saw this thing, I really liked it. Is there a story behind it? In fact, I had that happen to me just recently. An editor reached out to me asking about some pieces that I had created and asking if there was a story that was going along with it, because they were interested in the story if there was. There is a story, it's not written yet. But still, you know, so that's how those things can happen if you know, really focus on having your portfolio tell those narrative stories as well as, you know, your stories. And so I'll just touch a little bit on how I got my agent. I keep saying I'm an artist first and then a writer. And it's not that I haven't been writing my entire life. I have. It's just that at a certain point, I put the writing aside and I focused on the illustration more. So I just have much more comfort. I've been working in the illustration field for many years, many more years that I've been a picture book illustrator. I've only been in the picture book and publishing world for about, this is my 4th year. I started really focusing on it in 2017, actually the end of 2016. And so I say this, and it's true, but not true also, but, I feel like I came in through the back door. When I queried agents, I queried as an illustrator that wanted to write. And the agents that I queried, I didn't send them any stories. I just sent them illustrations. And all of them, because I said that I wanted to write and I was looking for an editorially minded agent, they all asked for samples of my writing. And so then I would send them that. And then I just feel like I got in through the back door, because I was like, here is this like beautiful stuff that I know that I'm pretty good at. And, you know, then I'll send you the stuff that I don't feel that I'm as good at. But, you know, luckily my agent saw what I would say is a diamond in the rough, because like I said, looking back at the first draft of A New Kind of Wild, which I sent to my agent when I was querying, wow, I don't know what she saw in it. She really is the reason that it is what it is, because she gave me some fantastic suggestions for that story. And that was the biggest reason that I signed with her. That and, I mean, she just gave me fantastic advice. And that, you know, if you get interest from an agent, you really want to have a conversation about them or with them about your stories, about like how they see, you know, maybe a specific story going, like what their thoughts editorially are for that story, if that's something that you want from them. Also talk about your career. I mean, it always seems so premature, you know, when you're not even published at all, like to be thinking about a career, but like, I mean, you're essentially marrying your agent. And it's not that you can't get a divorce. I know plenty of people that have left their agent and gone on to somebody else, but like, it's difficult. And especially if you have books published, you know, it's just difficult to leave. You're always going to be tied to whatever agent you sold your books with, because they're the ones that your royalties are going to come through. So I think, like in the past, I've had agents for other things. I had a licensing agent. I've had, and I wasn't necessarily as thoughtful about going after those agents. Somebody approached me and I was so flattered, and this was something that I wanted to do, that I didn't really do any research on my own. But when I was, and it ended up not being a great fit, but I stuck with it for like multiple years, because it just, you know, I was like, well, can I get another agent? Like, what, you know, all that self-doubt comes in. And so like, I really think that even though it's so painful to not have an agent, and you feel like getting an agent is going to be the thing that like propels you into publishing, it really, really is important to make sure that you take the time to research and make sure that that person is a good fit, because it's just so difficult when you're stuck with an agent that's not the right fit.
Agreed.
Sorry, that was a lot.
No. I want to, we have a couple of questions in the chat, so I'm just going to read a couple of them and we'll just do some answers. I know we're kind of reaching towards the end of our time. Jolanis, how do you know when your manuscript is ready to be sent to an agent? I don't know if you have, it's hard. I think what the rule of thumb that I've gone with is it's the best that I can make it at this given time. And definitely, if sharing it with a critique group, critique partners. I have several friends that always read my work, and even back then, you know, with their feedback and going through the revisions or taking workshops, and you worked on it to the point that there's nothing else that you can do to make it better. At this moment, it's usually kind of like a good.
I think that is the best advice. I mean, it's the same for me. And I just, again, want to reiterate how important having people to read your work is. And also not just having anybody read your work, but having people that can speak about it intelligently, you know, that are not just going to tell you, oh, it's amazing, but are going to give you constructive criticism. And
they don't only look at grammar, because
right.
You want content, you know, there's multiple layers, and you want other fellow writers. If you know, yes, your family can read it, but most of the time they can say, it's so beautiful. I love it.
Yeah, I think too, like, one thing that I think is important is when I was first starting out, really wanted to find a critique group, so badly. I joined a bunch of critique groups, and most of them didn't really work for me. It took me a while to find people that gave me the critique that I was looking for in a way that made sense to me, like that I was able to receive, right? It's not that they were bad critique partners. It's just that for what I needed, it wasn't working. And so you really need to find people that are going to click. And, you know, it takes a while to find them. You know, sometimes you might start a group and it might be, you know, it might be kind of stilted at first because you don't know each other or whatever. But, you know, give it a try and give it some time. But if it's not working, it's okay to seek out other people to share your work with, because once you find people that you really trust, it's just, it can bring your writing to just a whole nother level. And
get you through also get you through the hard times, because there's a lot of waiting, there's a lot of rejection, there's a lot of heartache in this business, and you do what you do. You write because you love it, and you love making up stories, and you have the dream of reaching readers. But it is a path that is filled with rejection and heartache. So you want
people that are rooting for you.
Yeah. I have from Mari Carmen, do you study other works as models? If so, what sorts of things do you consider? Mentor texts are absolutely really important. So I'm going to just say one thing in terms of that, especially if you work in different genres, but even if you don't, having the mentor text and reading through one, it keeps you current. So you're able to see what's being published, and the mentor text should be current. It should not just be what was published 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago. It should be what's being published now. So you know what's being published, you know what the business is looking for, you know what readers are responding to. But also you look at character and plot development. They help you frame sometimes a story perhaps in a new light or in a new way that you might have not considered if you hadn't looked at some of the mentor texts.
I definitely use mentor text too, especially when I was starting out. I would take a text and I would transcribe it, and then I would essentially dissect it. You know, I would figure out, okay, you know, what kind of story structure is this using? Is it like a hero's journey? Is it a 3-act plot? Is it a circular plot or a circular narrative? What kind of story is this? How are they telling it? What am I responding to in the language? Because for me, like, the sound of the words, the sound of the language is really important, especially because picture books are read aloud. And so, like, there are certain books that just like really resonate with me because of how the language flows. And so I like to look at, you know, how do they get that effect? Like, what are they using? Short sentences, long sentences? Is it the way that they're mixing sentences? Are they using alliteration? So yeah, I mean, I guess the short answer is I love also mentor texts. Yeah. Go ahead.
That was just going to add, you know, page turns, something else that I love looking at what they're doing is the page turns and the way they create an engagement with the reader, where those surprise moments was, and as well as the interaction of image and text, which also helps me envision where the what kinds of illustrations, since I don't illustrate, what kinds of illustrations might potentially accompany this text? What can I leave unsaid? And what could be potentially told through.
And I have to say, as an illustrator, those spaces that are left for the illustrator can be so exciting. I'm working on a book right now, and the text is very sparse. And so I have the opportunity to add so much richness and layer through what I decide to do in bringing the text forward. And so it can be really exciting as an illustrator what an author leaves out as much as they put in.
Awesome.
Were there any other questions?
I think so. Jodalis, what kind of mentorship or guidance should we seek out before finding an agent?
Oh, go ahead, because I'm typing it.
Oh, okay. So Les Musas has a great mentorship that's going on right now. So do definitely check them out for the next round. We Need Diverse Books also has a great mentorship program.
Latinx and publishing too, I think.
Latinx and publishing. And in fact, I'm actually going to do this right now. I'm going to send out the, no, not delete, share. I'm going to share a file, a PDF document that actually includes a couple of different workshops, mentorships, in addition to other resources. We didn't really fully get to talk about the author websites, but there's a list on what to include in author websites, or what is some good information to include on there. There's also other links and other information that hopefully you will all find useful.
Yeah. Oh, and Stephanie is asking, are agents the one who match authors and illustrators? And sometimes is the answer. Typically, no. Typically, what happens is an author will sell a manuscript either through their agent or, through whatever means. Will sell a manuscript to a publisher. And then the editor who buys that manuscript, in conjunction with the art director, will have a vision for what they think the look of the book should be. And they will go out and they will search for illustrators that they think will really do justice to the manuscript. Sometimes the author gets to have some input in that, and sometimes not. I don't know what your experience has been.
I was actually, so in both books, the editors and their team, the art director, they were looking, and then they would come to me and saying that we have a potential, this is their sample of their artwork, what do you think? So I did get asked on both times
That's awesome.
For my input, but I don't know that that's the norm.
No, I think sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't. Sometimes it depends on how big of an author you are. Like if you're a debut author, you might not necessarily be consulted. I think you always have the opportunity to tell them that if you absolutely hate their choice, but whether they do anything about it or not, I mean, you've sold the manuscript to them. So at this point, it's no longer your story. It is a collaboration.
And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, you can always, if there's something that you really feel strongly about, you can always enlist your agent's help to speak to your editor, to the publisher about it.
The one thing that I will say is there are some agents who do tend to pair their illustrators and their authors. There's one in particular that does it almost 100% of the time, and that's Steve Malk, who's an agent with Writers House. And I think a lot of the reason why he does that is he just is I don't know, he's just he's been in the industry a really long time. He knows the industry really well, and he represents a lot of crazy talented people, and he just that's what he does. But other than that, I've heard of it happen to a friend of mine for a graphic novel that she sold. Her agent paired her and an illustrator when they went on submission, but it doesn't happen that often. Oh, and Stephanie, to your point, that is okay. So she said it's hard to feel like it's not yours anymore. And this is something that's really, really important. And we didn't really talk about independent publishing versus traditional publishing, but that is essentially the biggest point about whether to go with indie publishing or self-publishing, or whether to go with traditional publishing. Because in indie publishing, you can do whatever you want, right? It's your story. You're the one that's publishing it. You can choose the illustrator. you can tell them exactly what to draw if you want. But when you sell to a traditional publisher, your story isn't your story anymore. It becomes a collaboration. Yeah. And not only that, the illustrator of the story is just as much the author in a sense, or creator in a sense, as the author is, because they're bringing their vision to the story. So you bring your vision through the words and they bring their vision through the illustrations. And so it becomes a collaboration, a true collaboration.
And I will say that I know initially I had some similar reservations because I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure how I was going to feel. What if they didn't get it right? What if? And I have to say that both times I've been so pleased. I've just been so happy. And they've brought a vision to the story that I didn't initially have, but that is 100% right for it. And they've created scenes that I hadn't, in my limited vision, hadn't seen them. And now I couldn't imagine them any other way.
That's good to hear, because I'm never on that side. I mean, obviously, if I write something, I'm going to illustrate it. But I've been on the other side, you know, where I'm illustrating somebody else's story. And it's interesting, too, because I don't know how much you guys know about the publishing process, but once an illustrator is assigned to a manuscript, there really isn't much communication between the illustrator and the author. In fact, in the last book that I just illustrated that's coming out this year, Mi Casa is My Home, I never talked to the writer until after. Now we chat all the time, but I really tried to separate myself, and the publisher tries to keep us separate as well, because they really want the illustrator to have the opportunity to imbue the story with their vision, and they don't want them to be like unduly influenced by the author. And I will say, in talking to the author of this book after I finished all the art, you know, we've had fantastic conversations. We have a lot in common, but I didn't realize that the main character of the book, it has the same name as her daughter. She wrote her daughter into the book, right? Which is fantastic for her. But if I had known that at the start, I would have felt a lot more pressure, and I would have felt like I needed to, you know, like it becomes more fraught, right? So the more you know about the manuscript that you're illustrating, the more like things that you might feel constrained about. And so that's why like there isn't much communication.
I think we've kind of reached the end of I think we went over a little bit, but we thank you. No, it was a wonderful, it was an awesome chat. Thank you all for sticking with us.
Yeah, it was so great to chat with you all. Thank you for your fabulous questions.
Yes, and our contact information is in the handout. So if you had more questions that didn't get answered, or parts on what's on the handout that we didn't get to cover, please feel free to email us. We would be more than happy to answer them.
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for coming. And a couple people have asked about replays. I mentioned this, I think, in the chat, and we mentioned it at the start, but this conversation is being recorded. It will be on Las Musas YouTube page, but it's also going to be linked on the webinars page on the Las Musas Books website. I think it's lasmusasbooks.com/webinars. So if you want to watch this again, then it will be available forever.
And you should receive also an email as soon as this is over. I forget, I think it's within 24 hours. You should probably also receive an email.
Perfect.
All right. Awesome. Well, it was so great to see all of you. Thank you for your questions. Thank you, Zara.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.